My guest today on Creative, Inspired, Happy is Andrea Bartz, New York Times bestselling thriller author. Her book, We Were Never Here, was a Reese's book club pick, and her latest thriller, The Last Ferry Out, is out next week. Today, we talk about who Andi considers the greats of thriller writing, what she learned from being a Reese's book club pick, and how it changed the trajectory of her career, understanding the market, and how reader feedback might affect what to write, tricks for building suspense and managing pacing in any kind of fiction, clear definitions of a reveal and a twist and why they're different, using Substack as a way to connect with other writers, and so much more. Creative, Inspired, Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with brilliant, fun authors about what made them fall in love with stories, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course their latest books, all hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Andrea. Welcome to Creative, Inspired, Happy. I'm really, really excited to have you on the show today because I know you're also a member of our community. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be on. And I love everything that you do for the creative community. So this is really fun. This is a treat.
Oh, thank you. Well, speaking of our community, we've got readers and writers. So I would love to first dive into you as a reader. When did you first fall in love with books?
I don't know that I remember a time before I loved books. My mom is a huge reader. And my sister and I went to this really conservative Christian school that was sort of my dad's doing. And my mom sort of begrudgingly was like, sure. And my mom volunteered in that library. And it was like every week, before book banning was a trend, every week teachers and parents were asking for books to be taken out of that library. I remember Harry Potter was taken out because that was, promoting witchcraft. It was like every book that you might think of that had something to do with the devil or sins would get taken out. And my mom would just quietly take them home and put them in our library and be like, you guys can read whatever you want. So we had basically our own banned books library. So from the time I was very young, I just sort of had, inherited this attitude of, I can read whatever. The world is my oyster, even though I'm in, a boring suburb in Wisconsin. Because I can read. So I just loved scary books and books that were probably too, mature for me and all sorts of stuff growing up.
And at what point did something click in your head where you thought, wait a second, I can also write these stories myself?
That's another thing and I wonder, I bet this is the same for you, but as a little kid, it was just telling stories is so natural, right? So I had a typewriter and I was typing up stories. My sister, Julia Bartz, she's also an author now, but when we were little, we were writing plays and musicals and novels together from the time we were little. And it just felt like, of course I love movies. So I try to make a movie. I love, with the camcorder at home, I love books. And so I try to write a book and I draw the pictures for it and that kind of thing. And I sort of forgot about that by the time I got to high school and college. I studied journalism. I moved into a different kind of writing. And then, something kind of clicked where I was like, I really love reading thrillers. Why don't I try writing one too in the meantime? And just put my little fiction cap back on after 20 some years. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
I love it. And this is actually a perfect segue into our first question from our community. So as you know, Creative, Inspired, Happy is not just a podcast. We are also an online community of readers and writers. So Katrina D has a question for you. And she wants to know, who do you consider the greats of thrillers, of the authors who are the best thriller writers? And do you take inspiration from them? Or did they, I don't know, affect you as you started writing your own stories?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thank you to Katrina for it. And this is reminding me too that it wasn't just a random idea that I decided to write a thriller. I had sat down and read the entire Dublin Murder Squad series, all of them that were out at the time by Tana French. And they're beautiful kind of literary mysteries, and they're compelling and they're dark and they're character driven. And I finished the last one and I was like, I want to write a book like that. It was just done, slam the book and I want to write that. So that was sort of the energy I was going for with my first book, The Lost Night. I think definitely Tana French is up there as just an incredible writer on every level. Leanne Moriarty, in a similar way, like tells really interesting suspense stories, but also captures, every one of her books has some line or lines in it that like capture something really poignant and true about the human experience that just resonates and like makes me see things in a different way. I think Gillian Flynn is, bless her, she's only written 3 novels, and yet like I always go back to her as just someone who tells a flawless page turner. And I find her so inspiring. This isn't quite the question, but I find her so inspiring because she also, got into other kinds of media, and she launched her own imprint, and she writes screenplays, and she's producing things, and just has used her success in the book world to push out into other, lifting up other stories as well. And I think that's so cool. And one more kind of thriller suspense genre blending author that never fails is Marisha Pessl. Now she's writing YA thrillers. I fell in love with Night Film. That was the first book of hers I read. But she just tells these like really intricate and complicated, yet very followable, if that's a word, kind of puzzle box mysteries. And whenever I finish one of her books, I'm just going, oh my God, she's so smart. How did she do that? Which is exactly how I love to feel after I finish a book. So I would add her to the ranks there.
Okay, so I definitely want to go back to this puzzle box feeling because I know that your new book uses those kind of elements, but we're going to do that later because before we talk about your upcoming book, which is out next week, it's called The Last Ferry Out. So we'll talk about this one, which is, if you're listening, I'm holding it up on the screen, but, so The Last Ferry Out is out next week. We're not going to talk about it yet. One more question before we get there. And so this new book is your 5th book, but along the way, you wrote a book called We Were Never Here, and that became a Reese's book club pick. It was optioned by Molly Sims. How did that change the trajectory of your career? How did that impact the way you write, how you think about how you put yourself out there as an author, or did it not do that at all?
That's such a great question. So We Were Never Here was my 3rd book. And interestingly, because it was the one that broke out, because it was the first one that introduced a lot of people to me, often readers will mistakenly call it my debut or just assume it's my first one. And I'm often making the comment on Instagram of like, while you wait for more, there's actually other ones that, are already existing that you could check out as well. It was the book that absolutely changed my life. It actually came out just a couple of weeks ago in mass market paperback, which was really exciting. This is one of those like slimmer 10.99 throw in your beach bag kind of books now, which is very cool that 4 years later it still, has a life of its own and finding new readers. It changed everything. I mean, it sold easily 10 times better than my first 2 books. It was a bit of a weird thing because I love this book, but I love all my books. I don't think it's 10 times bigger. So there was an element of, I think I wrote a great book and I poured my heart and soul into it. But also there was that element of luck that, it hit at the right time and found the right person at Reese's book club and whatnot. What's interesting is that when we found out that it was going to be, and I'm using we for my pub team, my publishing team, when we found out that it was going to be a Reese pick, I had already finished at that point a draft of my next book, The Spare Room. The Spare Room is very different from We Were Never Here. The Spare Room is a sort of gothic thruple thriller with murder that's, in a mansion during lockdown. And it's a very different kind of claustrophobic, queer, weird book. It's more domestic suspense, whereas We Were Never Here is truly a globe-trotting thriller. And now, at this point, both my editor and agent have said, yeah, if we knew what was going to happen with We Were Never Here, we probably wouldn't have approved that as your next book idea, which twist the knife into my heart,
Wow.
because I love that book too. And that book did fine. It didn't do nearly as well as We Were Never Here. And then this next book, The Last Ferry Out, that's coming out next week, was a bit of a course correction in terms of me thinking, okay, what did people really connect with in We Were Never Here? And how can I bring that into the next book, but in a way that doesn't just feel like a sort of rehashing or just like, throw the same ingredients into the blender and pour it out. How can I take those elements and make it something exciting for me to read and really fresh and exciting and new for people to, or for me to write and for people to read. So I think, publishing doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a business. I know you talk about this too, which I really appreciate. And it has, the success of We Were Never Here has made me think about like, what are the reasons that it did so well? And what are the things I want to keep doing because they're playing to my strengths?
Okay, so let's talk about The Last Ferry Out. I want you to tell our audience what this story is about, and then let's connect it back to what were those elements that you discovered that were in We Were Never Here that you've brought forth into The Last Ferry Out.
Yeah, absolutely. So The Last Ferry Out is about a woman who travels to this remote, tiny tropical island off of Mexico, hoping to find closure because her fiance, a few months earlier, died there in an accident on this island. So she travels out there to sort of make peace with it and get to understand her partner's final days. She meets this group of expats as well as some locals who knew her fiance and of course, are sharing some stories of those days. And she's finding it to be this really healing experience. This island is so beautiful. She can see why Esther, her fiance, loved it so much. And then she wakes up one morning and she has a text from one of the expats and he says, "You deserve to know the truth about Esther. Meet me in the Fonda tomorrow, 9 a.m. Meet me at the cafe." And she, of course, drops everything, rushes there, and he doesn't show. And in fact, he's disappeared. He's completely gone from the island. And the other expats are sort of chillingly cavalier about it. And she is sort of forced to confront the mystery of what really happened and if it was truly an accidental death, as she always believed. And, if not, there's the possibility that that killer is still on the island. So it's kind of this, like I said, puzzle box mystery with multiple timelines, multiple narrators. We have some vignettes sprinkled in from the different people of the island, the expats and the locals. And it all kind of comes together as you learn about these people, this community on this island, and the truth about Esther's final days. So I hope it's a really fun experience for people to read because it was really fun to write.
That sounds like a pretty complicated structure to try to juggle. So what were some of the challenges that you faced as you constructed this puzzle box mystery?
Oh my gosh, Evelyn, that is absolutely correct. It was really difficult to put together. And now I look at it and I'm like, oh, so fun. Look at all the puzzle pieces and the patchwork and the whatever. But as I was doing it, I was bashing my head against a wall. So I kept introducing new elements. I originally thought this was just going to be one narrator straight through. And then I realized, okay, I also want to hear from Esther from her trip there. And I want to have, her as a narrator. So these dual timelines, these two different narrators, and you're kind of hearing about their trips in tandem, right? And then I realized I also needed these flashbacks about their relationship. And those are in reverse chronological order, actually, I figured out. Showing what their time together was like, showing these elements of their relationship that it didn't feel right to just share it in sort of flashbacks here and there. I really wanted those as moments. And then once I'd started writing those, I realized, these can sort of be deployed at particular moments to provide insight into both what's happening to Esther in that past timeline and what's happening to Abby in her, current timeline. And then the final element that I realized I needed was that I wanted to start jumping into the heads of some of the other people on the island because what fascinated me about this group of characters, and especially these expats, is that, they've all chosen to forsake the lives that they were born into, right? And sort of by definition, this is, I had the idea when I was actually traveling solo in Mexico and met so many expats. It was interesting. A lot of them are really privileged by definition. That's sort of what allows you to just up and move somewhere else. And they were all either outrunning something or looking for something, seeking something. They had these really tight-knit groups of friends, but I wasn't sure they would have hung out if they didn't have a language in common. That was sort of the glue holding people together. And I just thought they were so enigmatic and interesting and perfectly friendly, and none of them murdery, to be clear. But I realized like I couldn't, with just the voices of Abby and Esther, these two women, I couldn't fully capture what I wanted to with this community and how the expat community interacts with the locals and where they have the same goals and where they have different goals. So I figured out which voices I wanted to include as sort of like vignettes, like almost their own mini short stories, and then where those could most effectively be put in. So I had huge Google Docs of timelines, and I had every narrator and timeline in different colors and different highlights. And I was moving things around. And what happens if I put, Rita's story before this? And then if I have to move this, it became a whole, like, it was like making the most complicated, I don't know, Rube Goldberg machine or something. But in the end, I am happy with how it worked out. And no one has called it confusing yet. People are having an okay time kind of keeping up and following through. So I feel good about where we landed.
I mean, I'm a little disappointed though that there's not like an Andy Bartz murder wall somewhere in your office with like the strings connecting
The
everything
red
together. I feel like
string.
that would be kind of on brand.
It would be on brand. It'd be very creepy for anyone who walked into my home. But yeah, that hasn't happened yet.
Anyone who knows you in real life and not just as a thriller author. So you mentioned that there were some elements that you looked back on We Were Never Here and then kind of brought them forward here as you said, a kind of a course correction almost, but also making sure that they're elements that you enjoy writing as an author. What were those, if you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure anyone's quite asked me that. I mean, one thing was, like I said, We Were Never Here felt big. It's, sort of a globe-trotting thriller. These characters start in Chile. There's part of the narrative happening in Cambodia. Like, it feels big and expansive. Whereas then my next book, The Spare Room, was very claustrophobic. Like I said, it was trapped in a mansion during lockdown. Like, it was gothic. And I think I used to work as a travel writer. I really enjoy like capturing sort of natural beauty and places that, foreign places, and the details and noticing things that make it feel really real and really like transportive for readers. So one element was, let's set this somewhere that's different and unique and that like can feel like a character, as they say. So shuttling us off to Mexico when I was writing some of this in winter. A lot of it was written in winter. That was like a nice move to be traveling in that sense. Another thing is that We Were Never Here has a decently big cast, unlike The Spare Room, which again was really about this throuple, these three people. And I think it's fun kind of juggling different characters and their different wants and needs and sort of the dynamics of like a close-knit and closed-door world within this larger context. And so that was something that I tried again with The Last Ferry Out. There's, it's not a huge island. It's not a huge number of characters, but it's enough that you really feel like there's all these, speaking of that red string again, like I did physically write out some of the dynamics on a sketch pad of like, okay, this person thinks this about this person and they feel this, but then together they want this from, sort of playing with that bigger, more complicated web of connections. And then one other change, and we'll see how this changes, but The Spare Room was my first like very queer novel. I'm queer myself. And it involves sort of a coming out story and this main character like realizing that she is bi after thinking that she was straight for much of her life. And so, and then of course, a throuple and poly and all that is like a little beyond the norm, like not something you read in domestic suspense every day. And the reaction was really interesting because, and I don't know how much is, sort of queer phobia or internalized homophobia, and or just people wanting to read about, especially in thrillers and domestic suspense, wanting to read about situations that feel closer to their lives. But there was pushback on that, and some people just really didn't like that there was sex in this book, and specifically some queer sex. It's not a super sexy or explicit book. Definitely not like an erotic thriller, but I did get that feedback. And so with this book, again, the two main characters, the two narrators are a queer couple, obviously, but it's not about the fact that they're queer. It's not a coming out story. It's more, the story could, I think, work pretty much as well if this were a straight couple, somebody mourning their fiance's passing in a similar way. And it's very chaste. There is no sex in this book whatsoever. And that was just, I wanted to focus more on these relationships between these friends and peers and the people that you meet on vacation, which is always really interesting, those quick bonds that you form. And so I sort of moved away from a sexier romantic storyline. Although, of course, the love story between the two main characters that ended in tragedy is sort of the spine holding the whole skeleton together.
Do you feel like you had to compromise part of your identity in order to become more widely appealing from a marketing perspective? Or do you feel like maybe you told that story that you wanted to tell in the spare room, and so now this is a different dimension of being queer, but then also, as any author, I think, who's been published multiple times knows, you have to choose what the focus is of each story. And as you said, you wanted to focus more on that thriller aspect, the puzzle box complexity of this story.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm not sure I can totally disentangle all the things, right? Like, do I feel like I compromised? No. Did it feel like a bit of a bummer to feel like there was coded language in the reviews, including trade reviews of the spare room that felt to me homophobic? That was a real bummer. And it's, too bad that I have to feel like, okay, that's something I know. And if I want to continue doing this as my full-time job, I'm going to keep that in mind. But all that said, The Spare Room was a book I needed to write then. I wrote it not too long after I had come out myself. That was during the pandemic. There was some stuff in it that echoed my own experience. Again, not the dead bodies part, but it was a story I needed to tell. But I feel like the next move and the more important thing for me is let's have queer stories that aren't about the queerness, the same way that you hear that in other marginalized communities, right? Like, Black authors are always saying, like, let's have stories that aren't just about Black trauma. Let's have stories where characters happen to be queer or have disabilities or BIPOC or whatever it is. So I feel like I don't need every story to be a queer mystery with that as sort of the headline. I want to keep playing with the kinds of stories I'm telling and characters I'm including and narrators I'm inhabiting. And this, to me, The Last Ferry Out felt like a really fun way to, explore some of the situations that are unique to the queer experience without having that be the focus, and to really have the focus be more on all of the mystery and all the secrets and all the sort of open questions.
Okay, then on that note, another question for you from our community. Tube says, how do you build suspense? How do you decide on the pace? And maybe an ancillary part of this question is, over the course of your career now, The Last Ferry Out is book 5. Have you gotten better at it? What tricks have you picked up along the way?
I love that question, because that's your job, whether you're a thriller writer or no matter what genre you're writing in. You're trying to keep the reader turning the page, right? So some of the tricks I employ, I'll start kind of narrow and then I'll pull back to some bigger picture things. But some of the tricks I employ include using what I call mini mysteries introducing these mini mysteries in the first few chapters. And they don't necessarily have to be the main mystery yet. Probably we haven't had time to get to the big question, but just little mentions of Cece Lyra, of The Shit No One Tells You About writing, calls them curiosity seeds, which is another term I really like. So in the first chapter, I'll have my narrator kind of have a quick thought about something that they don't want to think about, or have a quick reference to some memory that makes them shudder, and so they're not going to talk about it yet. And then that gets the reader going, ooh, curiosity is what we're trying to stoke in our readers. That gets the reader excited to solve that mystery and keep reading. And at some point, probably in that first third of the book, I'm going to answer that question, because it's not the main one yet. That's just, what happened a few months ago or whatever. That's something I can answer more quickly. But at that point, you've hooked them with even bigger mysteries and bigger questions. And so, you just keep introducing. Every time you're answering a question, you want to ask another one and pose another one, and just keep keep track of like, what is the thing that the reader desperately wants to know at this point, and how can I shape my narrative around it so that's really heightened and really need to know for them. In terms of pacing in a broader sense, and I know you talked about this too, but like figuring out your emotional beat sheet is really important. Figuring out like where the major beats need to hit is something that I originally learned by studying the book Save the Cat, which is about screenwriting. And then since then, they've released one called Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which is more specifically about novels and super helpful. And I would say a big difference between my first couple of books and my writing now is that even though I remain a pantser, even though I still don't have an outline and I still don't know where I'm going, I can more sort of intrinsically sense where the beats need to hit and what the story needs to do. Even if I don't know exactly what that big turning point is going to be, I can sort of sense as I'm writing it, okay, I'm getting close to 20,000 words. Like something big is about to happen that's going to send the hero or heroine in a totally new direction. And that is becoming more instinctual. That said, it's always really hard to write a novel. Even 5 books in, I'm starting my 6th, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? So something I also like to tell people is like, the book did not have this page turning quality in its first draft. At the beginning, it was just me muddling through and trying to figure out the story. And maybe some of the twists were there and some of the character stuff was there. But once you have finished it and you're looking at the entirety of it and you're editing stuff, that's when you can really add the foreshadowing that's going to make somebody like, ooh, can't wait to keep reading. You can figure out the cliffhangers. You can figure out, ooh, this little twist here that I set myself up for and didn't even realize. My subconscious queued it up for me. So I would say a lot of the stuff that makes it read as a quick read, a page turner, is actually layered in after I have the story more or less figured out.
It blows my mind that you're a thriller writer and that you don't outline. I cannot believe that you're a pantser. That's incredible. So speaking of these little twists, we have a question from our subscriber whose name is Thoughts from the Graying Morning. And their question is, do you feel the need to write shocking twists in your books, like in Gone Girl? And I want you to answer this question without spoilers, of course, about your books.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So speaking of Gone Girl like raised the stakes for all of us because it trained readers to start to expect and guess at crazy twists, especially at the midpoint, like the big, no spoilers, but like, the big game-changing bombshell that happens 50% of the way through Gone Girl means that now readers read the first 50%, like wondering what the big twist is going to be at the middle. So what I tell myself is, there are twists, and there's, usually a couple of them in my books, but there's also just reveals. And often people speak of them interchangeably, but to me, they're not the same. A definition someone gave me that I liked was a reveal is something that answering a question that the reader has been asking and really desperate to find out. And a twist is answering a question that they did not even have any idea they were supposed to be asking. Right? And like, think about the Gone Girl twist. It's a perfect example of that. Like you didn't see it coming because you had no idea to even consider that could be a twist. So when I'm writing without my outline, I am much like the reader, curious about these different things and trying to keep track of what questions I'm desperately trying to answer and the reader's trying desperately to answer. And, the answers will start to form in my mind, maybe a scene or two ahead. And so I can drop that as what feels like a bombshell or even feels like a twist, but is actually just a reveal. Like, somebody, this is just an example, not from a book. You knew that somebody was mailing those letters and I just revealed who. I answered a question. That's a big reveal and it can feel satisfying and exciting. The twists, of which there's only, you maybe get 1 or 2 good ones in a book if you're lucky. Those are like sent to me whispered into my ears from the angel, sent to me from above. And like, thank you, God, for them. Those are things that as I'm writing, I start to feel in the back of my mind. And I'm like, something's coming. Something big is coming. I don't know what it is, and then as I keep going, and then usually I'm like a few paragraphs away from the end of a scene and it'll explode in my mind. And I'm like, oh my God, and I have to write as quickly as I can to finish this scene so that I can get to write that big surprise, because that was such a surprise even to me. But I think as a reader, you are constantly playing with that, right? Asking yourself, like, what could that big surprise be? What, who could not be telling the truth? Like, how am I looking at this wrong? Again, that arms race, thanks to Gillian Flynn, gosh darn her, like making readers so smart. And so I'm doing a similar thing too with my twists and my surprises, where it's like, okay, like level one, the most obvious twist would be, I've led you to believe A, but it's actually B. But now it can't be B, because readers are smart. They're going to expect B as well. So is it C? Is it D? Wait, what if I'm asking the wrong question and it's actually 1 or 2 and I'm not even looking at it right? You see what I'm saying? So it's a very fun part of the process for me. And I never totally have these things figured out until they're actually on the page. And then it's a really satisfying moment. And that's what makes pantsing fun. Although most of the time it's awful and I don't recommend it. And I really, really wish that I could outline.
It does sound really delightful, though, at least as you said when you're talking about the puzzle box aspects. It sounds delightful after the fact when it's done and you look back and you're like, gosh, that was so great. Do you remember that time when I came up with this idea?
And it snapped everything into focus, and it was like my subconscious had queued it all up. I mean, you must have had that experience as a writer too, where like the solution just appears.
Sometimes you discover things and it all makes so much sense that you feel like you just discovered it. Like it already existed out there in the universe of creativity, and you had just been going down the wrong path. And then you stumbled upon this idea and you're like, oh, I am an explorer and I've succeeded. And it just makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's like you've queued up all these things around it to make it slot in perfectly. You were just missing that key piece, that keystone. So it's a great feeling in creative writing, I'll tell you that.
It really is one of the best. And I feel like it's such a marker of being human. Like you said, we're actually the ones seeding all of these different things. And then it's our brain, our remarkable brain, where we don't know how it works and it pulls it together into something perfect.
Yeah.
Along the lines of market pressures or how thrillers have changed, Diana W. from our community says, I've noticed recently that thriller and crime writers are starting to get more gruesome, and I'm wondering if they're bending to market pressure. Is there a push to outdo yourself or to outdo others?
That is such an interesting question. And I want to say first, this is not in your question at all, but The Last Ferry Out is like nearly gruesome free. It is like the least gory thing I've ever, none of my books are gory, but this is the least. Like my scaredy cat friends who like begrudgingly read my books because they love me, but otherwise wouldn't touch a thriller, they all agreed, like this is the cleanest, most sort of emotionally intense, but not at all grisly or gruesome read. So in case that clears anything up for anyone, this is a very not gruesome book. Not, don't have to worry about the squeamish. But I think what's happening is that everyone is feeling this pressure of just, it's getting harder and harder to make a book stand out. And no one's quite sure what's working. I mean, you've spoken about this too. Like Book Talk has a lot of power still, but doesn't have that supreme power it used to. Same thing with book clubs. Book clubs are no longer a guaranteed spot on the list or that kind of thing. And, editors say they want, or agents say they want high concept, but like, what does that really mean? You still have to be able to deliver on it. If you look at the list now, it's not all high concept stuff. So there's this sort of lack of clarity of what's working. And so everyone's trying to make their work stand out, right? Like it feels like a quiet, especially in genre fiction, like a quiet thriller. It's going to be the easiest to sort of put aside and not get people talking. And so I guess I don't know that I have noticed it personally in the books that I'm reading. But then again, I have such a self-selected, like the books that I'm blurbing and stuff are very much in line with mine. And so I guess I don't have my finger on the pulse of the entire industry and the entire genre. I'm rambling a little, but I will say, I think people are just trying to find ways to stand out in a crowded market and to make people talk about their books. And sort of a low-hanging fruit, I guess, would be to have some crazy, grisly scene that they think will have people talking and telling other people and having a big emotional reaction and having some staying power. I personally would much rather be violent with the emotions and the character dynamics and the, betrayals and the psychological warfare. That's very much more what interests me. But yeah, I do think, and I think there's tons of great stuff that you can find in that genre if you want to avoid the more gruesome stuff. Um, but I haven't heard a directive from anyone in the publishing industry saying they want more gruesomeness. What I have heard, and this might actually be what she's referring to as well, is that more and more thriller writers are moving into horror, which horror isn't obviously necessarily gruesome. Horror can also be more supernatural. It can be, there's different elements that can make it horror. But I think that is part of an industry trend where psychological thrillers are no longer reigning supreme. And there seems to be a lot of readers in horror. And so a lot of thriller writers, myself included with my new book, are a little bit treading into that territory.
All right, let's do a little shift. We were talking about making your book stand out, how to reach readers. And you and I are both on Substack. We both kind of love Substack, probably for different reasons. You have a great community there. I'd love you to kind of just briefly tell our listeners, if they're curious more about you, what is your Substack about and why do you write it?
Yeah, I love Substack. It is, yeah, before we started recording, you called it your happy place. And I feel like that is so true and just such a delightful corner of the internet for now, which who knows, anything can change at any time. So we're going to love it while we can. But I write a Substack called Get It Right, WRITE, Get It Right. And it's at andibartz.substack.com. And it is full of writing advice, writing tips, publishing intel, kind of like the stuff we're talking about today, craft lessons. I do weekly GChat interviews with authors that have new-ish projects to promote. That's really fun because we literally talk over GChat and you get to just read a transcript. So it's kind of chatty and casual, and we get into some stuff that maybe you wouldn't always get in a more formal interview. You're just reading over my shoulder. I have a compendium that I've pulled together of successful query letters so that anyone in the querying trenches for free can access. We have dozens and dozens of York Times bestsellers and other amazing authors who share their successful query letters. So you can kind of see what works and model yours after one that's similar. So yeah, I've just had a really great time building it up. I've had it a little bit over a year. And I love the community. I love that I'm not dealing with the algorithm from Instagram or TikTok that just decides one day to not show my content to any of my followers or people who've signed on. I love that it's, a newsletter that just goes directly to your inbox and we can communicate. And I love the community that has formed there. It's so supportive. It's so, just uplifting one another. And I felt like I really had kind of a service I could provide in sharing my unfiltered experiences as a professional author, because I was noticing, especially on Threads, I don't know why Threads is so full of this, but I felt like there was sort of this influx of bad publishing advice and like charlatans promising that if you paid them tons of money, they would make you get a 6-figure book deal, or just telling you just the wrong advice about how to query your novel or that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, I can't be prescriptive. I'm not going to tell people how to live their lives or do their career. But I have a lot of experience. I've been doing this professionally since, I signed with my agent in 2016. And I can tell you what I did and what worked. And I can be really honest and really candid about the highs and the lows and the tough stuff and the great stuff. And we can celebrate together and we can be real together. And it's just been an incredible experience getting to, be in community with other writers over all the shared highs and lows and good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah, you and I are kindred spirits in that respect. I really dislike the charlatans, as you call them, out there who are preying on writers' dreams. And
Yes.
so thank you for doing this service and being so open. I think transparency in our industry is wonderful, so we can help other writers actually achieve their dreams in a realistic way. I will make sure to drop a link to your Substack in the episode notes for anyone who's watching or listening who wants to check that out. And
Awesome.
Andi, it was so great to have you on the show. Everyone, make sure you pick up a copy of The Last Ferry Out. It's available for pre-order now. It will be out next week. Andi, thank you so much. This was really fun.
This was a treat, Evelyn. Thank you so much for having me on. I thank you for everything that you do, truly.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.